The land was quiet in the early morning, and the soft wind moved over the tall grass. Ethan stood at the edge of his property, slowly breathing in the peaceful air. For years, this land had been his calm place. A piece of earth he inherited from his father, a place he loved deeply. He never expected that this quiet morning would change his life forever. As Ethan walked forward, he suddenly heard a deep rumbling sound. He stopped, confused, trying to understand where the noise was coming from. Within seconds, he saw large construction trucks rolling toward his land, the ground shaking under their heavy wheels. Workers began stepping out, shouting instructions, pointing at different corners of the field as if they had full control of the place. Ethan walked closer, his voice calm but firm. "What are you doing on my land?" he asked the nearest worker. The worker barely looked at him and waved his hand in an annoyed way. "We're building new homes here, sir. You should stay back." The HOA approved everything. Ethan felt a wave of confusion. "HOA," he repeated quietly, before he could ask more questions. Another worker yelled, "Move the trucks forward. Start the digging." Ethan watched as machines pushed into the soil, his soil, breaking the earth that his father once protected with his own hands. Soon a group of well-dressed people arrived in polished cars. They were the HOA board members, walking with proud steps, like kings who owned every place they touched. The president, Mr. Collins, wore dark glasses and a confident smile that never reached his eyes. He looked at Ethan as if Ethan was nothing but a simple obstacle. "This land is now part of our development plan," Collins said with a cold tone. "We've already scheduled the construction of 96 homes. Everything is approved. You need to stay out of the way." Ethan's heartbeat slowed, not from fear but from shock. He had never sold this land, never signed anything, never gave permission for anyone to touch even a single inch of it. But here they were, talking like they owned everything. He looked at the huge machines digging deep lines into the earth. The land that belonged to his family for more than 50 years. The land where he planted trees with his father when he was just a child. The land where he promised himself that no one would ever take it away. For a moment he felt anger rise in him, sharp and hot, but then something changed inside him. Ethan's eyes softened. His posture relaxed, and a small mysterious smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was a smile that would confuse anyone watching, because it did not match the situation at all. Mr. Collins noticed it. "Why are you smiling?" he asked with irritation. But Ethan did not respond. He simply turned, stepped back from the construction noise, and began walking home slowly. He looked calm, almost peaceful, as if everything happening was part of a plan only he knew. The workers continued their loud movements. Machines roared, dust filled the air, but Ethan walked as if none of it touched him. Some neighbors watched from a distance, whispering. They knew Ethan as a quiet man, a man who did not create trouble. But today, something about him felt different. Something hidden, something strong, something dangerous in a calm way. When Ethan reached his small house, he closed the door behind him softly. He stood still for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. Then he walked to a wooden shelf and pulled out an old metal box. The box was heavy and covered with scratches from years of use. Ethan placed it on the table and slowly opened it. Inside were old papers, photos, and documents that carried the story of his family. But Ethan searched for only one thing. His fingers stopped on a long folded document wrapped in plastic. He lifted it gently, like holding something sacred. It was the original land deed, signed by his father, stamped by the government, and never changed. Ethan opened it and carefully read through the lines. His calm smile returned, a little stronger now. Everything written there proved one truth. He still owned every inch of that land outside. The sound of heavy machines continued destroying the soil. But inside Ethan's house, the real power was sitting quietly in his hands. The kind of power that could change everything when the right moment arrived. Ethan placed the deed back on the table and whispered to himself, "They have no idea what they've just started." Then he looked toward the camera of this story, as if sharing a gentle message with every viewer hearing his journey. If you want to follow what happens next, make sure to subscribe to the channel, it helps a lot. And this story is only beginning, and with that, the first chapter of Ethan's silent war began. A war he never chose, but one he was fully prepared to finish. Because sometimes the quietest man carries the loudest truth. And Ethan was ready to let the truth speak with perfect timing. The next morning came with no peace. Ethan woke to the echo of machines shaking the air outside. The ground trembled as if the land itself was trying to warn him. He stepped outside and saw even more construction vehicles arriving. Huge cranes, cement mixers, drilling machines, and dozens of workers moving with fast steps. It looked like an entire small city had been dropped onto his land overnight. Ethan observed silently, his face calm but his mind sharp. The HOA was not wasting a single second. They were building as fast as possible, trying to finish everything before Ethan could react. He understood their strategy. If the homes were completed, they could claim he delayed too long or had no right to object. But Ethan was way ahead of them. He just did not show it. Mr. Collins arrived again. Wearing the same proud smile, he walked like a man who thought the world bent for him. "Ethan, you're still here," Collins said with fake surprise. "This area is under HOA development now. You don't belong here anymore." Ethan didn't argue. He simply watched the construction workers marking the ground, laying out foundations, and building fences over his property line. The fence posts were being hammered into the earth, his earth, with no hesitation. The sight could break a weaker man, but Ethan's silence hid something deep, something strong. When he did not reply, Collins stepped closer, his voice turning colder. "If you try to interfere, we will call the police and file a trespassing report. Do you understand?" Ethan looked at him gently, almost kindly. He nodded once, then walked away, not because he was scared, but because he was thinking far ahead of this moment. By afternoon, the noise grew louder. Bulldozers were flattening the land, tearing up grass, stones, and roots. Soil flew into the air like brown clouds. Workers shouted. Trucks beeped. Concrete poured. It was chaos. And yet Ethan stood at a distance with the patience of someone watching a fire burn itself out. Neighbors gathered along the small road, whispering to each other. Many of them knew the history of this land. They knew Ethan's father, a man who protected the property like a guardian. Some people murmured, "This is wrong." Others said, "Ethan is planning something. Look at him. He is too calm." Their eyes followed him as he quietly took pictures on his phone. Every machine, every violation, every illegal action. He documented everything, date by date, detail by detail. Evidence was his armor, and he was collecting it silently, carefully, patiently. Hours passed before his phone rang. He looked at the screen and saw the name of his old friend, Daniel, a lawyer he trusted deeply. Ethan answered in a quiet tone. "Daniel." "They started building." Daniel sounded alarmed. "They started already? Without notifying you? Without permits?" "Ethan, this is bigger than I thought." Ethan remained calm. "I know, let them continue." There was a long pause on the other end. Daniel finally asked, "Ethan, are you doing what I think you're doing?" Ethan responded softly. "Yes." Daniel exhaled slowly, almost in disbelief. "You're playing the long game. You're dangerous when you get quiet." Ethan smiled and looked at the machines in the distance. "Just be ready," he said. Then he hung up the call as the sun began to set. The land looked wounded. Deep trenches cut through the soil. Cement blocks lay everywhere, and metal frames now stood like skeletons for future houses. Ethan walked to a spot where a tall wooden stake was hammered into the ground. A bright orange marker hung from it, shaking in the wind. It read, "Lotto 1 approved." He touched the stake gently, remembering his father's voice telling him, "This land is yours, not just by paper, but by promise." But his memory was interrupted by a loud voice behind him. "Hey, you can't be here." A security guard hired by the HOA rushed toward him. "This is a construction zone. You have to leave." Ethan looked at the man with calm eyes. "This is my land," he said quietly. The guard hesitated, uncertain, but then repeated, "You need to step back or we'll report you." Ethan didn't argue. He walked away with steady steps. Not because he accepted defeat, but because he understood timing. And his moment was not now. Night fell. But the HOA's lights stayed bright. Tall flood lamps glowed over the land, letting workers continue late into the night. They were building fast, too fast, like people running from a truth they didn't want to catch them. Ethan watched from the small hill behind his house. He stood there silently, hands in his pockets, the land glowing silver under the artificial lights. In that moment, his phone vibrated with a message. Daniel had sent him a document, a legal file he was preparing. Ethan read the message under the moonlight. "Everything you're gathering will work. Just stay patient." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood something the HOA didn't. He understood that every building they finished, every wall they raised, every dollar they spent, was not strengthening their case, it was strengthening his. He whispered to himself, "Let them build. Let them finish every single home." Down below, the machines roared louder. But Ethan's whisper carried more power than all that noise, because he knew something they didn't know. A storm was coming, and he was its quiet center, watching everything, remembering everything, preparing for the moment when the truth would hit them harder than any machine ever could. Days turned into weeks, and the land Ethan had protected all his life slowly transformed into a crowded construction zone. Where there had once been open fields and quiet wind, now there were rising walls, long rows of concrete, and the sharp metallic sound of tools hitting steel. Every morning, Ethan walked outside and studied the progress with calm eyes. The HOA had no idea that every nail, every brick, every inch of construction was tightening a trap they were setting for themselves. The workers were moving with extraordinary speed. Huge machines rolled across the property, dropping materials, lifting beams, shaping houses from the ground up. The foundations were complete, and the wooden frames stood tall like skeletons waiting for life. Electric lines were being installed, pipes laid, roads flattened. It was shocking how fast the HOA was moving. It was clear they were racing against something they feared but didn't fully understand. Mr. Collins walked across the site every day, barking orders at everyone. "Faster. Finish the west line this week. The buyers want early tours." He walked past Ethan with an arrogant tilt of his head. "You see, Ethan, progress doesn't wait for anyone," he said once, his smile sharp like a blade. "These homes will be filled with families soon, and your name will be forgotten." Ethan didn't answer. Silence was his armor, and every silence he gave them made them underestimate him more. He simply took pictures, counted houses, measured distance markers, and wrote everything in a small notebook he carried in his pocket. It was filled with dates, measurements, photos, signatures, and every violation he spotted. He wasn't collecting notes, he was building a case brick by brick, just like they were building their homes. One afternoon, while workers were lifting heavy roof panels onto the first row of houses, Ethan noticed a small group of neighbors standing behind the fence, whispering. Most of them were old residents who had lived in the area long before the HOA existed. One elderly man stepped closer and nodded respectfully to Ethan. "I knew your father," the old man said softly. "He was a good man. He would have been proud of how calm you are." Ethan smiled gently. "I'm only doing what he taught me," he replied. The old man leaned forward and whispered, Everyone can see what they're doing is wrong, but you're too quiet. It scares them more than anger would. Ethan looked back at the growing buildings and said, "They think they've taken everything, but they don't know what I'm holding," and it was true. The deed rested safely in Ethan's home. But more importantly, the law rested on his side. He knew that the moment the homes were fully completed, the HOA would have everything to lose. They were pouring millions of dollars into structures they did not legally own. They were gambling with time, money, and arrogance. And they were losing without knowing it, every evening. Ethan walked the outer edges of the property. Watching the homes take shape, he noticed workers painting walls, installing windows, laying tiles. He saw them planting small decorative trees, putting up streetlights, building sidewalks. Every finished detail was another thread in the net he was weaving quietly. One evening, Ethan received an envelope delivered to his door. It carried the HOA seal, thick and official-looking. He opened it to find a warning letter. "You are hereby instructed to refrain from entering the construction zone. You are not the legal owner of this land." Ethan read the letter with a slow smile. They were trying to scare him with paper. But they didn't know he held a paper far more powerful, the real deed, the original proof. The one document they could never erase. The next day, the HOA tightened their control even more. Security guards patrolled the area. Fences were reinforced, workers rushed without breaks. The project was now 90% complete. Row after row of brand new houses stood ready. Shining under the sun like trophies, the HOA members started celebrating early. They walked through the half-complete neighborhood with proud faces, imagining the profit, imagining the future. They even started bringing potential buyers for early tours, showing off kitchens, bedrooms, and living spaces that weren't legally theirs to show. Ethan observed one of these tours from a distance. He watched Colin speaking to a small group of interested families. "This community will be the safest in the area," Colin said loudly. "We have total legal control over this land." Ethan almost laughed at the irony. They were advertising stolen property with full confidence. They had built almost everything, but they had not built the truth. The truth still sat quietly with Ethan, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. That night, as the construction lights flickered across the half-finished road, Ethan walked to the top of a small rise and looked over the entire site. Almost all 96 homes stood complete. Roofs finished, walls painted, glass shining under the lamps. It looked like a new town had been born from the earth. A town built on lies, greed, and stolen land. Ethan stood there silently, the wind gently brushing against him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He opened the message from Daniel. It contained a scanned copy of the final tax ownership records. It was official proof that Ethan still legally owned everything the HOA was standing on. Ethan read the message and whispered, "Just a little more. Let them finish completely," because Ethan knew a powerful truth. When someone builds a kingdom on stolen ground, the moment the real owner speaks, the whole kingdom falls at once. And the HOA had no idea how close that moment was. The final week arrived like a slow-moving thundercloud, heavy and full of unspoken danger. Ethan woke each morning to the same noise, the pounding of hammers, the grinding of machines, the shouting of workers rushing to finish the last details. But something had changed in the air. There was tension, a pressure that even the workers felt. Though they did not understand why, by now, almost every home stood complete. Fresh paint shone under the sun. Doors were installed, driveways poured, and sprinkler systems tested. The HOA had transformed his land into a beautiful neighborhood. But illegal, Ethan watched with quiet patience. The kind of patience that hides a blade underneath. On Monday, the HOA held a meeting right on the construction site. A large tent was set up with chairs, tables, project boards, and banners showing HOA 96, New Luxury Community. The board members stood proudly, greeting contractors and early buyers. Mr. Collins strutted around like the king of the land, his smile wide and full of victory. Ethan stood far back near the trees, his hands behind his back. He listened quietly as Collins spoke into a microphone. "This development is the future of the area," Collins announced. "We faced challenges, legal delays, and uncooperative locals. But we pushed forward." Ethan felt his eyebrows lift slightly. He was the uncooperative local. And hearing those words only made the moment sweeter. The crowd clapped as Collins pointed toward the completed rows of homes. "We are ahead of schedule," he said confidently, "in 1 week. These homes will be open for final inspection and ready for families." Ethan's calm smile appeared again. Subtle and controlled, 1 week was all he needed. Later that afternoon, a contractor approached Ethan while checking the boundary fence. He looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "Sir, I heard this place was yours once," the man whispered cautiously. Ethan nodded. The contractor lowered his voice even more. "Then why are you letting them do this?" Ethan looked at the neighborhood forming on the horizon and answered softly. "Because sometimes the best way to win is to let people build their own downfall." The contractor didn't fully understand. But the seriousness in Ethan's eyes made him step away respectfully. As the week continued, the HOA's urgency increased. Workers were pushed harder, schedules doubled, and mistakes were covered quickly to avoid delays. They were rushing not because of deadlines, but because deep down they sensed something. They sensed that Ethan's silence was not surrender, it was strategy. One evening, Collins approached Ethan directly, something he rarely did. He walked with forced confidence and fake politeness. "Ethan," Collins said, "I want to make you an offer." Ethan remained still, silent, letting Collins speak. "Sell us what's left of your land," Collins said. "We'll give you a fair price. Enough money to move anywhere else." Ethan looked at him with calm eyes and asked quietly, "Why would I sell what you already believe is yours?" That single question made Collins freeze. His confident posture stiffened, his smile weakened for a moment. Fear flickered in his eyes, real fear, because he realized Ethan wasn't simply resisting. He was planning, but Collins covered it quickly with false bravado. "You'll lose in court," he said sharply. "HOA has more resources, more power." Ethan leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Power means nothing if you stand on stolen ground." Collins flinched at the words. He turned away, muttering angry threats, but Ethan could see the shaking in his steps. The seed of doubt had finally entered his mind, and it was growing fast. On Thursday, a sudden meeting was held in the HOA office trailer. Board members argued loudly inside, their voices spilling through the thin walls. Ethan stood outside, listening quietly without needing to get too close. "We still don't have the updated deed." One board member shouted, "Then forge it." Another yelled back, "Do you know what kind of crime that is?" Someone else screamed, "Selling homes without clear ownership is already a crime." "Shut up, calm down. We'll deal with Ethan later." Their panic tasted like victory. They were cracking from the inside. And Ethan hadn't even stepped into the fight yet. Friday came with gray skies and heavy wind, as if nature itself felt the approaching storm. Workers were finishing minor details, mailboxes, street name signs, driveway seals, almost everything was complete now. Ethan walked between the rows at sunset, his shoes crunching lightly on the new pavement. He studied each house carefully, his expression unreadable. Each finished detail meant a higher cost for the HOA, a deeper hole they were digging for themselves. When Ethan returned home, he found a thick envelope on his doorstep once again. Inside was another threatening letter from the HOA. This one was more aggressive, full of legal terms meant to intimidate him. Ethan read it slowly, then placed it carefully beside the original deed. 2 papers, one full of lies, one full of truth. Truth always wins. But timing decides when. That night, Daniel called him. His voice held a controlled excitement. "Ethan, everything is ready," Daniel said. "I filed all documents, all evidence is organized. And the judge has agreed to review the case first thing Monday morning." Ethan closed his eyes and breathed deeply. "Good," he whispered. Daniel added, "Ethan, once this starts, they won't see it coming." Ethan looked out at the rows of shining homes on his land and replied, "That's the point, because the storm wasn't coming. The storm was already here, and next week, the HOA would walk into a courtroom, believing they owned everything. But Ethan would walk in with the truth that could wipe away their entire kingdom in one moment. And he was ready, calm, silent, and ready. Monday morning arrived with a soft gray sky. Ethan stood outside his house, watching the 96 homes glint under the early sun. Each house stood perfectly built, complete. A monument to the HOA's greed and ignorance. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the time had finally come. Inside the HOA office, Collins was pacing nervously, his confident smile nowhere to be seen. He had received the court notice, and for the first time, he realized that Ethan had more than patience. He had preparation, strategy, and undeniable proof. The board members argued, their voices rising and falling like a storm. "Are we really going to lose everything?" One of them whispered, "No. We can still fight." Another replied, but even his voice trembled. Ethan arrived at the office quietly. He walked past security, past the guards who tried to stop him. They stepped back, sensing something, though they could not explain it. Inside the large conference room, the HOA board waited, their faces stiff and pale. Collins looked up and forced a smile. "Ethan, what is this about?" he asked, trying to regain control. Ethan calmly placed a large envelope on the table. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on him. Inside the envelope was the original deed, carefully wrapped, stamped, and untouched by time. The kind of document that could end arguments with a single glance. He looked at Collins and said softly, "This belongs to me. Everything here is mine." Collins laughed nervously. "This is fake," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "It cannot be real. We have built these homes. We've spent millions." Ethan did not reply. He simply smiled faintly. Then he handed over a second envelope, filled with tax receipts, survey maps, and government approvals. Every single paper proving legal ownership beyond any doubt. The room went quiet, tension hanging so thick it could be cut with a knife. Board members glanced at each other, fear creeping in. "Impossible," Collins whispered. Ethan slowly opened the deed, spreading it carefully across the table. The ink shone under the light, the signatures clear. The survey lines perfectly matched every home the HOA had built. Every inch of land they thought they owned belonged to Ethan. One board member swallowed hard. "This can't be happening," she muttered. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his calm voice echoing in the room. "You built 96 homes on my land. You poured money, effort, and arrogance into what you thought was yours. But you ignored one thing, truth. And truth always finds its way back." Collins slammed his hands on the table, his face red with anger and panic. "You can't just take this away. We've invested everything." Ethan's eyes were steady. "You already have, in a sense, invested in your own mistake," he said. "You rushed, you built, you assumed. And now you face the consequences." At that moment, a knock came at the door. The office assistant entered with a thick packet from the court. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside were legal documents confirming that the judge had scheduled an emergency hearing. The court would review every piece of evidence he had collected, and the HOA could not argue or delay. Collins tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous. We'll appeal." "Will?" But Ethan held up a hand. "You already made your choice by building without ownership. Every action you took strengthened my case, and weakened yours." He looked around the room. each board member avoiding his gaze. They realized the truth. Their empire of 96 homes was built on sand. And the tide had come. Ethan took a slow breath and continued. You see, I let you finish everything. Every home, every detail, every improvement. Because I wanted to make sure your investment, your pride, and your arrogance all depended on a false claim. And now, it all rests on me. The room shook with disbelief. Board members muttered to each other. Their voices small and fearful. Collins turned pale, realizing he had underestimated Ethan completely. He had believed that money, speed, and legal tricks would protect him. But he had not seen patience, planning, and absolute truth. Ethan placed the final piece on the table, a set of photographs he had taken each day. The photos showed the construction progress. Every violation, every illegal intrusion, every step that the HOA took onto land that was not theirs. They will not just see the deed, Ethan said softly. They will see how much you risked on something you never owned. And the court will decide who truly holds power here. One board member trembled and whispered, You planned all this. Ethan nodded slowly. Not just planned, I waited, I observed. I recorded, and now your victory is already mine. Collins' hands shook. The reality crashing down on him. The homes they thought they had stolen were legally impossible to claim. The money spent, the pride earned. The false sense of power all meaningless. Ethan smiled faintly, not cruelly, but with quiet satisfaction. He whispered to himself, Just a little more patience, and the rest will follow. And as he left the office, carrying the envelopes with calm hands, he knew the final battle in court would be swift, decisive, and complete. The storm was ready to break. And the HOA had no idea how fast the tide would turn. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Ethan entered calmly, carrying his files and the envelopes containing the deed, tax records, survey maps, and photographs. Every eye in the room followed him as he moved with quiet confidence. The HOA members were already inside, their faces pale and anxious. Collins fidgeted in his seat, tapping papers nervously. He had never seen Ethan like this before. Calm, collected, and ready, the judge arrived. A stern woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see every truth and lie in the room. Court is in session, she announced, her voice echoing across the hall. The lawyers for the HOA began immediately, arguing aggressively. This land was part of the HOA development plan. Our client has invested millions in good faith. The original deed is outdated, and ownership disputes have been resolved legally, the lead attorney claimed. Ethan remained silent, watching carefully, noting every detail. When the HOA lawyer paused for breath, Ethan's lawyer, Daniel, stood and spoke slowly. Your Honor, the documents presented by the HOA are not only incomplete but illegal. My client holds the original deed, tax records, government approvals, and photographic evidence proving ownership. Every step the HOA took, construction, fencing, installation of utilities, was on land that legally belongs to Mr. Ethan. The courtroom shifted in tension. Collins' face drained of color, his confident posture crumbling. He whispered angrily to his lawyer, They can't prove all this. But Ethan's lawyer calmly opened the envelope, spreading the deed across the judge's table. The ink was clear, signatures visible, survey lines precise. Every document lined up perfectly with the actual land and the 96 homes the HOA had built. The judge leaned forward, examining the papers closely. She flipped through the tax records, checked the survey maps, and finally looked at the photographs. Each photo showed the HOA workers, machinery, and construction progress on Ethan's land, every violation documented in sequence, every illegal intrusion captured in detail. The judge's expression changed slowly, from curiosity to surprise, then to concern. Collins tried to interrupt, his voice rising. These are just technicalities, Your Honor. We acted in good faith. We didn't. Ethan raised his hand slightly. Calm and measured. Your Honor, let me clarify, he said softly. I allowed the construction to continue to ensure that the HOA invested everything into the homes. Every brick, every nail, every dollar they spent is evidence of their knowledge that this land did not belong to them. And now, the law must decide who truly owns this property. The courtroom fell silent. Even the spectators held their breath, sensing the intensity of the moment. The judge nodded slowly, signaling Ethan to continue. He presented the photographs one by one, pointing to the rows of houses, the roads, the fences, each of these structures. Every inch of this development sits on my client's land, Ethan said. The HOA invested in what they believed was theirs. But legally, it is not. Colin's lawyer tried again, raising objections. This evidence is too late, Your Honor. They could have stopped construction. Daniel smiled faintly. Your Honor, exactly, but my client allowed them to continue. Knowing that this would strengthen his case, they built their own proof. And now the law will decide accordingly. The judge leaned back, her eyes sharp and calculating. She turned to Collins and his board. Do you have any evidence that contradicts the ownership of Mr. Ethan? Collins looked down, his throat dry. He shuffled papers nervously, but no counter-evidence existed. Every legal document, every approval, every photograph showed the opposite. Ethan remained calm, quiet, and observant. He had waited years for this moment. Every step the HOA took, every arrogant action, had led them here now. The law was about to act. The court became tense, almost like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Finally, the judge spoke, her voice firm and decisive. After reviewing all documents, photographs, tax records, and legal approvals, it is clear that Mr. Ethan is the lawful owner of the land upon which these 96 homes have been constructed. All construction by the HOA was done without legal ownership or consent. Therefore, all property, structures, and rights associated with the land revert to Mr. Ethan. Gasps filled the room. Collins sank back in his chair, disbelief and panic flashing across his face. Board members muttered to each other, realizing that millions spent, every action taken, and every moment of pride had been wasted. Ethan remained standing, calm, collected, his hands folded, a small smile on his face. The truth had spoken, louder than any machine. Any construction, any threat. Reporters outside the courtroom cameras clicked as Ethan emerged. The 96 homes, once a symbol of arrogance and greed, now belonged fully to him. The storm had hit, swift and precise. And the HOA had no defense, no excuses, only the bitter realization of their mistakes. Ethan whispered softly to Daniel as they walked away. It's done. The truth wins. But patience always matters. The court had declared justice. And the next chapter of his land, his life, and the homes built on greed was about to begin. The morning after the court verdict, Ethan stood at the edge of his land. The sun rose slowly over the 96 homes that now legally belonged to him. Each structure glinted under the soft light, a monument to patience, strategy, and the law. The air was calm, almost as if the land itself was breathing in relief. Neighbors began to gather quietly, curious and astonished. They had watched the entire saga unfold from the beginning. Now, seeing the truth finally declared, many whispered words of respect and admiration. You stood calm the entire time, an elderly neighbor said softly. You never rushed, you never yelled. And yet you won, Ethan nodded, a gentle smile on his face. It was never about fighting with anger. It was about letting the truth work its way across the land. The HOA members were packing their belongings. Collins walked out last, his head low, shoulders slumped. The defeat was total, undeniable, and absolute. Every dollar they spent, every claim they made, Every moment of arrogance all gone, Ethan watched silently. Understanding the full weight of their loss, he had let them build their own evidence, and now it had crushed their false authority. Daniel came up beside him. "Ethan, they never expected this," he said quietly. "I never wanted them to," Ethan replied. His gaze drifted over the rows of homes, over the streets, over the trees planted by the HOA. Even their efforts now belonged to him. Legally and morally, the land that had been his father's, his family's for generations, was finally safe. As Ethan walked through the newly completed neighborhood, he noticed small details. The HOA had tried to show off fresh lawns, painted doors, flower beds, decorative mailboxes. He smiled. Everything was beautiful, but it was built on arrogance. And now it belonged to him. The irony was not lost on him, and he appreciated the poetic justice. Each step he took reminded him of the careful planning, the patience, and the quiet strength it took to win without chaos. Some of the new homeowners, who had already signed preliminary agreements with the HOA, arrived hesitantly. They were confused, frightened, and unsure of what would happen now. Ethan approached them calmly. "Don't worry," he said softly. "You may live here, but all rules must be fair, and every action legal." He smiled gently. "The past mistakes will guide future decisions." Collins appeared one last time. Standing at the street corner, he looked at Ethan with a mix of anger, shame, and reluctant respect. You really outsmarted us," he said quietly. Ethan simply nodded. "Sometimes building patience is more powerful than building walls," he replied. Collins turned away, defeated, and walked slowly toward his car. The lessons of greed and arrogance were etched in his mind. Ethan didn't need to speak more. The truth had already taught them. Later that evening, Ethan returned to the small hill overlooking his land. He stood silently, letting the wind brush against him. The 96 homes glowed under the sunset. The streets quiet for the first time since construction began. The land was calm, whole, and victorious. For years, it had been a battlefield of patience and courage. Now it was a symbol of wisdom, planning, and the power of quiet determination. Daniel joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "You know," Daniel said softly, "this story will be remembered for years." "The quiet man who waited for the storm," Ethan smiled faintly. "It was never about recognition. It was about justice, patience, and letting the truth speak louder than anger." They clinked cups quietly, watching the glowing neighborhood. The gentle peace after the storm was more satisfying than any victory. That night, Ethan walked through the neighborhood. He opened the doors of some homes, looked at rooms the HOA had built. Each detail reminded him of the careful strategy, the patience that had allowed him to win. He imagined the life that could now grow in these homes under legal and fair circumstances. The land that had been threatened, the sweat and effort wasted by the HOA. Everything was now restored, correct and true. As the stars appeared in the sky, Ethan stood at the edge of the hill again. He whispered softly to the wind, "My father's land is safe. My family's legacy protected, and the truth is stronger than any wall." The 96 homes below shimmered in the moonlight. Silent, perfect, and legally his. Ethan smiled quietly. The storm had passed, but its lessons would remain forever. And for the first time in weeks, he felt complete peace. Not because there was no challenge, but because he had mastered patience, courage, and justice. The HOA had built their own trap, and he had allowed it. Now the land, the homes, and the truth belonged fully to him. The quiet man had won, the storm had passed, and the land breathed once again under the calm night. Ethan turned, walking back to his small house. He looked at the horizon one last time that night, a faint smile on his face, knowing that patience, strategy, and quiet determination were far stronger than arrogance, greed, or haste. And as he entered his home, Closing the door behind him, he whispered softly, "This is only the beginning, but the truth will always prevail."